We have the jobs report numbers that came out today for the month of June. And as an economist, I want to walk you through those numbers because they tell a very interesting story. So in June, the economy gained about 57,000 jobs, which means that the unemployment rate ticked down by 0.1% to 4.2%. Now, this job growth is similar to the private payroll jobs numbers we saw from ADP in June, which demonstrated that we gained about 98,000 jobs, which is lower than expectations both for ADP as well as BLS. In addition, the April and May numbers were both revised down slightly by a combined 74,000 jobs. This means over the last 3 months, we have gained on average about 100,000 jobs. And there are some very interesting trends in these numbers that differ from some of the trends we've seen over the last months. So healthcare, which has been holding up the labor market, right? The gains in the jobs in healthcare have been the majority of jobs we've seen, has slightly cooled off. It only gained about 22,000 jobs this month. Another really weird statistical quirk in this report is the loss of jobs, specifically in leisure and hospitality, by about 61,000 after jumping in May. Analysts suggest this is due to the World Cup and all of the hiring by hotels and food service that happened during that time, but we will just have to see what happens in July. Now, one thing that's also very interesting about this report is what's behind the fall in the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate, right, as we measure it in media, is a calculation of the number of people who are working divided by the total labor force. So the unemployment rate can fall if the number of people working increases or the labor force decreases, right? And the labor force is the total number of people who are actively looking for work or were currently employed in the economy. And what this report found is that labor force participation actually ticked down this month by about 720,000 people, declining from a rate of 83.9% to 83.3%. And even though by historical standards, 57,000 jobs really isn't a ton of jobs that are gained in a given month, the decline in the labor force participation rate might have caused the unemployment rate, right, the U3, to decrease. One last thing I want to talk about, and I think something that gets lost in these reports about unemployment, is looking at wage growth for Americans, right? We can see from these BLS reports how much wages are growing year over year for every American. And in the month of June, average weekly wages rose slightly to a rate of about 3.5% year over year, which on its face sounds great, like wages are growing, people are earning more, but we always have to compare how much wages are growing in relationship to inflation, right? To measure how much people are able to afford or purchase, are they able to still keep up with the same standard of living? Now, we don't have the inflation numbers for the month of June. We will be receiving those around mid next week, and I'm happy to talk about that in another video. However, we do have those numbers for the month of May, and as of right now, average inflation year over year has risen by about 4.2%. That means that inflation rate at a rate of 4.2% is increasing faster than average weekly earnings, which is rising at about 3.5%. And that means, right, that people's wages aren't going as far, right? The cost of goods is rising faster than the amount of money that people are earning. And that is a huge concern to the economy. So much so that actually the dollar, which is sensitive to interest rate expectations, which of course is sensitive to purchasing power and inflation, fell sharply as these unemployment numbers were released. Now, again, we will have better context for these numbers once we receive the inflation numbers later this month, but I'll be here when that happens. For now, that's all I got. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know.